Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I have a topic I want to dive into around a strategy to stay leaner and healthier during building phases, especially for those over 30. And I'll tie in why specifically if you're over 30, and probably honestly, the older you get, the more helpful this is going to be there. And this is definitely something that I've changed my mind on in the past. I think some of it, if you listen to the podcast recently, it's not going to come as a huge surprise. But I think the strategy itself will probably be somewhat surprising for some people and maybe something they haven't thought about. But first, though, before I dive into that, though, if you want to learn more about a body recomp, what it is, how to do it, the two different types, why it's important to focus on body comp over just scale weights, and then 10 things you need for body recomp, then my free checklist is for you. And the link to that is in the show notes. To go back to our topic, what I want to talk about is a strategy to stay leaner and healthier during building phases. So when we look at human physiology, we have the state of building up, called the anabolic state, right? So that's where we're building up tissue. It could be fat tissue, it could be muscle tissue, right? But we're not building up state. And then we have breaking down, which is catabolic, right? So this is where we're using stored energy, we're breaking down tissue. When you could call this fed state versus fasted state physiology. And each one's going to be, we probably are somewhat getting into that from day to day, obviously, right? The longer that you go without eating, the more you're going to dip into that fasted physiology. The more often you're eating, the more you're eating, the more you're going to be in that fed state. So I think this isn't necessarily just an on-off switch. I think this is on a spectrum. And obviously, right after a meal, it's going to be at the highest in the fed state. Extended fast, you're going to be in more in the fasted state physiology, obviously. But again, we have these two concepts. So when we look at a whole, when we're in a building or a maintenance phase, so we're consuming enough food, right? Again, we're actually in a building maintenance phase. How would we know your weight has not trended down over extended periods of time? For maybe it's even pushing up, and again, you're in the surplus. And so in this state, we're spending most of our time fed and eating plenty of carbs, typically, right? Yes, people could do super high fat, but that would not be something I would do low carb and super high fat in a building phase. So we're well fed, we're eating plenty of carbs, and this is good. We want this. That's how we build muscle, and that's how we can drive performance. Like, we want to make sure we're in that state. But when we start to tip the scales of just that, mostly that, and we're never getting into the fasted side of things and or pushing that side to the further end of the spectrum. Again, it's not an on or off switch, right? It's going to be a gradient scale here. And I think if we can push it more to that fasted every once in a while, so more of that breaking down state. But we're never really accessing that breaking down. Maybe we are a tiny bit, but it's never deep enough when we're just constantly fueling our body and giving our body enough food. But I think by accessing this breaking down system and pushing it more towards, if we went to the extreme, and again, I don't want you to get caught up in the extremes. What is the extreme? Just again, I think as I talk about all this will make more sense. We can keep our metabolic health sharp, and it's good to enter that system because it's a different state, right? It's a different physiological state. Whereas if just with anything, you don't use it, you don't get to that state, you're going to run into some issues. We can think about this on a larger scale too, right? Again, and I've made this point in one of my previous podcast episodes, just message me if you want it, about I think it's important to get into a deficit every once in a while, even if you aren't necessarily like overly high in body fat. If you are, then you definitely need to dip into a deficit at some point in what I'm about to talk about today. But I still think, generally speaking, and again, it comes back to accessing these certain systems in our body that, again, if we don't ever use them or push them a bit, they can become just not as flexible and not as proficient, right? It'd be the same thing as if you're not ever pushing muscle, if you're never training for muscle growth, your body's not going to add more. Like, you need to send that signal to do it. And the same thing here. And it can be good to access both of these. And we could take this on the flip side of, if you're always like someone that's in a low calorie state, exercising a ton on the leaner side, it's like you need to be more in that fed state a bit more, right? Like, you need to access the other side. So this is specifically for people who have been in a phase where they're not doing that. And I'll talk about who this is for and who it's not as well too. So we spend all our time in this building up state, and we almost never access the breaking down system that can keep our metabolic health sharp. So instead, what we do is periodically, whether it be weekly, on a weekly basis, you do it 2 times a week, you do it more bi-weekly, we do one of the following, right? We have at least one fasted low to moderate intensity cardio session. I think 1 to 3 per week is a good sweet spot. And I think where you fall at on this depends on where we're at from a body fat percentage standpoint, how often you get into this state, where your body fat levels are now, and just like overall stress load on the body. But I think 1 to 3 is a good spot. So we're looking at, this could be some walking, it could be some incline walking, it could be your 20 to 30-minute cardio session that it's more moderate intensity, but it's not like an interval session. Or you wouldn't want to do this into a really heavy lift or a big lift where you need to make sure you perform, right? So we want to do at least 1 to 3 of those per week, or a lower carb day. Okay. So we have a lower carb day where you're typically eating, saying 400 carbs a day or more, and we dip down into a lower carb state, or we do a combination of both, right? So we have it where we could do one of these fasted days with a lower carb day in combination. You could do them both on the same day, or maybe you do one day of the fast and then you do a lower carb day, or sorry, the fasted training and then a lower carb day, or again, you do one or the other. I think which route you decide to go, it really depends on where you're at, what you've been doing overall. Like if you already train fasted a lot because of your schedule, whatever it is, maybe you would benefit more from a potentially one lower carb day. And I also think the more you pull this lever for each one of these, the less you're going to be able to do overall. If you do a moderate intensity cardio session, that's the route you want to go. Okay, maybe you do that 3 times a week, you're good to go, or maybe you do it 2 times a week, you're good to go. But now if we start to add in a lower carb day on top of that, now maybe we're looking at, hey, you're only going to do 1 to 2 fasted cardio sessions and then a lower carb day, right? There. So again, I think it depends on that. And then again, it also depends on where your physiology is currently at there. But think of this as the opposite of a refeed day during dieting. So when we fat loss diet, it can be a good idea to, again, you're always in the more of the breaking down state to get to that point where you're more in the building up state for a short period of time. There's some potential physiological benefits. It seems like it's mostly psychological, but it makes sense that there's probably some physiological benefits as well too. Now, again, and same thing with both of these, this isn't going to magically lead to fat loss, right? It's more about dipping into these states that you haven't been at for a while. Like I said, you're giving your body something it hasn't seen in a while or it hasn't accessed in a while, and we're keeping that system sharp because again, when we don't use it, it starts to not be as good, not be as efficient, and then now we have to work on that. And when these systems are sharp, body composition is the process of it is a bit more smooth, right? It's easier to gain more muscle and it's easier to stay leaner and to lose body fat if you want to there. So that's why it's important to do that. And just from an overall health perspective, when we're in better metabolic health, like long-term health is going to be much better and you're going to feel better and everything like that. Like I said, there's some physiological benefits of doing this, but also some psychological ones as well too. So I think appetite control, if you're always eating high carb, you're always pushing your carbohydrate intake or your food intake, it can be nice to have a day where maybe you back off that a little bit. And then even from a GI standpoint as well too, right? Less bloating, sluggish feeling, and it's probably good on your GI tract to do that. Just from like personal example, in the past, I would just push. It was literally like, hey, I'm just going to push a surplus the entire time, high carb. It's okay. I'm definitely not doing any fasted cardio. That's going to I'm going to lose all my muscle. I'm probably going to move less because again, now I'm going to tip the scale into potentially being an energy deficit or a smaller surplus. So I'm not going to move as much. Low carbs. Are you freaking kidding me? I'm trying to gain muscle. Like I'm definitely not doing that. So these are all things that I would have said in the past where it's like, oh man, I feel like that was not the right way to go about it. Like again, yeah, we're definitely maximizing the anabolic stimulus and everything like that with some of those things. But we're also looking at, hey, now maybe our metabolic health isn't as good. And what that's going to lead to, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, is now you're going to be more likely to gain body fat in a surplus versus muscle growth. And then again, from a GI standpoint too, like, oh, I got to get my calories in. I can't be under this calorie surplus because then I'm not going to maximize muscle growth. And now you're forcing food in your stomach that, hey, your GI tract probably needs a little bit of a break from that perspective, right? So from a science jargon perspective, this approach can improve metabolic flexibility. So this comes back to that. We want to access these different ways that our body uses energy, right? So whether that's more on the fat side of things or the carbohydrate side of things, we want to be able to switch between both of those and be good at it. When we're not able to do, that's when body comp process of it can be a bit tougher and it can make a deficit or even a surplus less effective when you do it. Keep fat oxidation pathways active. So again, that's using fat as a fuel source for your body. Again, that's when you're in a low carb state, maybe more fasted. Improve and keep mitochondria healthy. Again, super important in a building phase when we're constantly we're constantly well fed. It can improve insulin sensitivity. Again, that's going to be how your body partitions the nutrients you give it. So whether it goes more towards fat stores or muscle stores are to be used as energy. And then this all can help limit unnecessary fat gain later in a build, right? This isn't about burning calories or fat loss. So this strategy is not, hey, it's going to be some fat burning magic. No, it's not about burning more calories. It's about keeping your metabolism adaptable and responsive to what we do to it and keeping, again, that side of the system sharp. So again, instead of giving your body more of what it already gets every single day, carbs, insulin, right? Like just being super well fed, you occasionally give it a brief window of what it hasn't seen in maybe weeks, months, for some people, even years, right? So again, lower insulin state, lower glycogen state, increased reliance on fat oxidation, and AMPK activation, which is essentially going to lead to that kind of process of more of the breaking down state, right? We're not dieting. We're just keeping the breaking down system sharp. So then that way, when we want to access it later in the future fat loss phase, we don't have to, it's ready to go. Like we can be more effective and efficient with our body comp change when we want to. So that's a rationale for doing this, right? So now I want to talk about who this is best for and who it may not be ideal for, because this is a case by case basis. It's not across the board. Like this is going to be a good strategy for everyone. So who's it going to be best for? You've been running long building phases. Like you've been doing this. I talk about, hey, we probably don't want to spend too much time each year in a fat loss phase. We can take that too far. And so if you've been running a long building phase, right? So you've been doing it for 12 plus weeks, or again, you haven't fat loss dieted in say 6 to 12 plus months, you're at the state where you could probably, this is going to be super effective for you. So we've been doing an extended build for a while, and we haven't done any of these things. We haven't accessed that breaking down system as much. Again, you will access this a little bit through exercise, and you'll access it through your, obviously, like we're not eating 24 hours out of the day, like we sleep, so we're not eating during that time. You will access this system a bit, but like I said, we want to push deeper. I think it can be beneficial to push deeper into that state, especially the longer you've been more on the fed side of things. It can also be good for people who do feel like they gain fat easily in a building phase. So if you feel like once you get into a surplus, your body just doesn't adapt to that very well, or it does adapt to it well, or however you want to say it, and you just gain fat a bit easier. This could be a good strategy to employ. Now, again, we have to be, sometimes it can be tough to be subjective here, depending on your history and what you have going on. I think the leaner that somebody's gotten, like how they view leanness in their own body gets skewed. So we have to be careful with that. There's a bit of we have to be careful with the subjectiveness of this, because a lot of people are like, I gain fat easily, but it's you also kind of eat like an idiot and you don't have any structure around your nutrition. And that's the problem, right? Not that you gain fat easily. It's just you don't have structure outside of a fat loss phase. But there are some people that their body's just maybe not as good at, like, it just adapts. I'm trying to think here if it would adapt more. Sometimes that confuses me. But again, just fat, like your body doesn't adapt as well to an energy surplus. You'll have some people that when they get into a surplus, their body will increase NEAT, they'll move more, they'll expend more energy, and so their body just adapts well to a surplus, whereas some people's bodies don't, and it's like they don't see that increase in say NEAT, and they end up being in a larger surplus, right? Maybe you're just starting to feel sluggish at higher calories. You've been pushing higher calories for 3 to 6 months, and you're just starting to feel sluggish from day to day, right? Again, we have that bloating feeling. We're just not feeling as good. You just don't feel as good as you did, right? Again, this is a sign that we need to start. We need to start using this energy system a bit more. And another good one that I didn't put here on my post is you feel like you can't go more than 3 hours without eating, or like more than 2 hours without eating. You eat and then maybe you start to crash, or you eat and that's, hey, I got to freaking eat like every 3 hours. If I don't, I get super freaking hungry. Or like even when you train and it's like you haven't eaten for say an hour, like maybe it's like, hey, I typically eat an hour beforehand. I need that. And then you go and train and you haven't eaten for 2 to 3 hours and it just wrecks your workout. Like I've been there. And if that's the case, this is probably a strategy that we need to employ. Now, there's some things I'm going to say that will be like, hey, maybe you don't need to, but just generally speaking, if that's how you feel during your phase, like your building phases outside fat loss, we need to look into this. If you want better metabolic flexibility, which you do, as we talked about the importance of that, then you definitely want to do this. And then you aren't getting the same training response from carbs. So maybe I guess the best way I can describe this is when you come out of a fat loss phase, you have carbs and it's like, boom, like your training just feels freaking amazing. You get a great pump, like you just feel super strong and you feel great. And then you get further and further into your building phase and you have more and more carbs and you just become more sluggish. You don't get that same pump that you did initially, right? Like you just don't get the same response from carbohydrates as you did earlier in your building phase. Again, that's a sign that we need to do this there. Okay. So that's who it's best for. The person here that this would be good for is you've been into a building phase for 12, 16 plus weeks now. Maybe you're not super lean, or maybe you're not super overweight, but you've gained a little bit of body fat. You're just starting to feel a little sluggish. Bloating's not great, or has been bad. Digestion's just been off a little bit. When you're just not feeling the same as you did with more carbs. Again, sign that we need to incorporate this in at that point. And again, you are at a little bit of like your scale weight's trended up it's trending up. It's not, I'm saying not from one day to the next, but like your average weight's trending up. Now, who it's not ideal for though, because there's certain people who this could be super beneficial for, but then there's some people where it's not going to be beneficial. Chronic undereaters. So if you're someone that you do undereat calories all the time and if I eat over 1,200 calories, I'm going to gain a bunch of body fat. This is not for you. You're already super lean. So that's why I'm saying you probably don't want to do this coming right out of a fat loss phase. And again, I think the leanness, I think there's some exception to this, but if you're someone who chronically undereats, you're scared to gain any amount of body fat, you are at this really low state, your biofeedback's not great, this isn't for you, right? Maybe if you're struggling to build muscle because you're not eating enough, because you're one of these two people, or you have one or two of these things, again, this probably isn't the greatest strategy for you, or we need to be very careful with how we employ it and how we do it. But you're also just not going to get as much out of it at that point. Maybe you're in like a really high stress, poor recovery phase. Again, this isn't to say you can't do it in that state, but we just, again, need to be more strategic about it versus just throwing it in. Again, if you struggle to hit your calories consistently, like you're super inconsistent with your caloric intake, maybe you don't necessarily undereat, but it's like, hey, you have some days where you eat a lot, and then you have some days where then like you're just super inconsistent from day to day. This probably isn't for you, and you're not going to get as much out of it. Again, I still think we could utilize it in that situation. We just have to be smarter about it there. And then if you already train fasted and have long fasting windows, this isn't to say you can't do this, but you're going to get less out of it than somebody who is eating throughout the entire day and everything like that. And they haven't done any sort of like cardiovascular training in the fastest state whatsoever. And we don't want to do this on performance-based days. So if we have a sport that we play or we have a performance-related goal that we need to perform well in, we don't want to have these days on those days. To go back to the fasted one, so if you're someone who, because I have a client who comes to mind, she, because of her schedule, she already trains fasted regularly in the morning, which is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I'd rather somebody do that than feel like they need to force food down just because they need to be eating, right? Because again, if we think if your weight is staying the same or it's trending up, you're spending more time in that fed state, so you're good to go. Like you're good from that standpoint. But she's on the leaner side, she's going to get less out of this. Do I still think there could be some benefit for her to potentially do it? Yes, but she's going to get less out of it, and we just have to do it less frequently, and we have to be less aggressive with it. Whereas again, like someone who is on the first few things I said, they're more on that side. They're spending more of their time on that fed state. If you were to look at this like on a I don't know how to describe it. If you were to look at it like, hey, you're more on this side, then you would benefit from being able to do it a bit more, and you're going to get more out of it there, right? But again, we definitely don't want to do it on performance-based days there. Now, what's the strategy not going to do? It's not going to fix overeating. It's not going to lead to meaningful fat loss. It's not going to replace solid nutrition, and it's not going to undo a sloppy surplus. Okay, so if you're constantly overeating, this isn't a strategy that's, oh, I'm just doing this, so I'm going to be good to go. I can do whatever I want. No, that's not it. Again, same thing. It's not going to undo a sloppy surplus. So if you already way overshot, just think that this is going to help improve the rest of your building phase and get you back into a spot where you can recalibrate of being in a place where your body's going to utilize the fuel you give it much better, but it's not going to lead to fat loss, and we don't want it to. That's not the goal here. We're just trying to dip into this in the short term to make sure that this system runs well. Where you're really going to push it is going to be in your fat loss phase there. And it's not going to replace solid nutrition. So we need to make sure that our nutrition is still on track, and this isn't an excuse to eat like an asshole. And so again, this is a small strategic metabolic nudge to keep the system sharp. And now you're going to get more out of the fed state as well too, the building up state, if you can dip into this as well too. And you're going to get more out of the breaking down state when you go to it in your next fat loss phase. So again, what does this look like? Option 1 to 2 fasted low to moderate intensity cardio sessions per week. Option 2, 1 to 2 low carb days every 1 to 2 weeks. You're looking at protein unchanged, carbs around 80 to 150 grams per day. Fats are going to be slightly higher, calories at maintenance or a touch below. And you're looking at 8 to 12K steps on these days. That's going to be the big thing, is we still want to stay active. We're going to get more out of it if we can still move more on those days, but low intensity stuff, right? So yeah. So again, we're looking at 1 to 2 low carb days every 1 to 2 weeks or so, and then 1 to 2 fasted cardio, low to moderate intensity cardio sessions per week. Or again, combine both on the same day. Now, remember, these are the most common ways, but there are other ways that you can use the same concept, right? Like depending on the person and their physiology, they could do 2 lower carb days every single week, right? Depending on what they do. Again, someone could do 3 fasted cardio sessions per week, depending on what they do and where they're at, what their stress load is like, and everything like that. They could do 1 low carb day with 3, right? Just the options are endless, but these are just ways that we can go about it, and the most common there. I think if you're starting, I would pick option 1, 2, or 3 and go and see what works best for you. But you also need to look at, okay, am I already having lower carb days already? I'm probably not going to get as much out of that if I'm already doing that. And when I look back in the last 6 months, have I ever done a fasted cardio session that's moderate to medium intensity or low to medium intensity? No. Okay, that's probably the one that I'm going to circle and put higher on the priority list there. Yeah. So example, again, a normal day, you're doing about 180 grams of protein, 350 carbs, 70 grams of fat. Maybe on the lower carb day, now you're doing 180 protein, 50 to 100 grams of carbs, 79 grams of fat, 8 to 12K plus steps, no lifting or performance-based events on that day there. Just lower kind of movement days, or sorry, yeah, movement, but lower intensity days there. So just remember, this isn't required, but for the right lifter over 30 at the right time, it really can keep your metabolism sharp and your build cleaner. So this isn't for everyone, but I do think the further we dip into a build, the more aggressive it is, the longer we're in it, the higher our body fat levels get, the more that we need to utilize this. Again, the person that it's not going to be great for is the person who got super shredded. They're already under eating calories, they're under recovered, and they're not gaining any weight, and they just got out of a fat loss phase, right? Like for that person, this isn't going to be helpful there. You've already maximize that side of the feel state, right? We need to now shift into the other side to get more out of this side now in the future. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully this gave you some more insight and just a unique way to think about your build and how you can incorporate some of these things. So let me know if you have any questions on this. Reach out to me on Instagram, Jeff HOEHN_. Give me a follow if you haven't yet. And then if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help people find it. Talk soon.